The first thing Elias Crow noticed about the girl was how still she stood. Not the nervous stillness of fear, not the stiff posture of pride, but the kind of stillness that came from having learned, far too young, that moving too much invited punishment. The auction yard was loud, men shouting bids, cattle bawling, boots scraping dust, but the girl did not flinch once. Her eyes stayed low, her hands folded together, in front of her like she was trying to disappear into herself. Elias had come to town to buy a new mule and maybe some feed. He hadn't planned on staying long. He certainly hadn't planned on walking away with a human life. But when he saw her standing beside that reeking, red-faced man who swayed on his feet and kept one hand clenched around a half-empty bottle, something twisted hard in his chest. The man laughed too loudly, slurred his words, told anyone who would listen that the girl was useless anyway. Deaf, he said. Born wrong. Couldn't hear a thing. Elias believed him because the girl didn't react to the noise, the shouting, the auctioneer's bell. She looked like someone already halfway gone from the world. And when the bidding started, low, insulting, casual, it felt less like a sale and more like a burial. Elias told himself it wasn't his business. He'd spent most of his life minding his own business because caring had only ever cost him. His ranch sat 30 miles from the nearest town, a spread of dry land and stubborn cattle that mirrored the man himself. He'd buried his wife 5 years earlier after a fever took her, and after that, the house had grown too quiet. Not peaceful, quiet like something waiting to collapse. He worked, ate, slept, and spoke to no one except his horses and the wind. Loneliness had settled into him like dust into old floorboards, unavoidable, permanent. He had no children, no family left worth naming. He told himself he liked it that way, but watching that drunk father shove his daughter forward, calling her merchandise, Elias felt a heat rise in him that had nothing to do with logic. The girl's dress was too thin for the season, her shoes cracked and worn through. When the man yanked her arm to show her off, she didn't cry out. She didn't even look at him. She just absorbed it. That was when Elias raised his hand and named a price that made the crowd murmur. Too high for a deaf girl, someone said. Too generous for a problem, another laughed. Elias didn't care. He just wanted the bidding to stop. The father took the money with shaking hands, counted it twice, then laughed again, as if he'd won something instead of lost everything. He didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. He staggered away toward the saloon, already forgetting her. Elias stood there with the pouch of coins, suddenly heavy in his coat pocket, realizing for the first time that he had no idea what to do next. The girl didn't move. She didn't ask where they were going. She didn't ask anything at all. Elias cleared his throat, feeling foolish, and gestured toward his wagon. "Come on," he said, not knowing if she could hear him. She followed without question. That hurt worse than resistance would have. As they rode away from town, the noise faded behind them, replaced by the creak of leather and the rhythm of hooves. The girl sat stiffly beside him, eyes fixed on the horizon, her face unreadable. Elias wondered what kind of hell she was leaving behind, and whether the quiet of his ranch would be any kinder. The days that followed were awkward, heavy with unspoken rules and misunderstandings. Elias showed her the small room off the kitchen, clean but bare, and left her there with folded clothes and a basin of water. He pointed to things more than he spoke. He assumed she couldn't hear, so he spoke less and less, falling back into silence because it was easier than guessing. She worked when he asked, cooking simple meals, sweeping, feeding chickens. She never complained, never smiled either. At night, Elias would sit on the porch and stare out at the land, listening to the coyotes howl, thinking about the fact that another human breathed under his roof now. He told himself he'd done the right thing. He told himself she was safer. But safety, he was learning, wasn't the same as comfort. He didn't know her name yet. He hadn't asked. He wasn't sure how. Every time he looked at her, he felt the weight of the transaction that had brought her here, and shame burned behind his ribs. Weeks passed. Winter edged closer. The girl, still nameless to him, moved through the ranch like a shadow. She startled when touched unexpectedly. She flinched at raised hands, even when Elias was only reaching for a tool. Once He dropped a metal bucket behind her and she didn't react at all. He told himself that proved it. Deaf, just like her father said. And yet, there were moments, small ones. Once late at night, Elias spoke aloud to himself about the fence that needed mending, and he could have sworn she paused in the doorway, her shoulders tightening. Another time he muttered a curse under his breath, and she glanced up, eyes flicking toward him for just a second too fast. He dismissed it as coincidence. He wanted to believe the story was simple. Complicated stories demanded responsibility. The truth came to him by accident. It always does. One afternoon, a storm rolled in, fast and violent. Thunder cracked so close it rattled the windows. Elias was in the barn when he heard a sound, not from the sky, but from the house. A sharp intake of breath. A gasp. He froze. Slowly, quietly, he stepped toward the door and looked through the window. The girl stood in the kitchen, hands clamped over her ears, her body shaking with each boom of thunder, hearing fully, unmistakably hearing. Elias's chest tightened until it hurt. He didn't burst in. He didn't confront her. He just stood there, rain soaking his coat, understanding crashing down harder than the storm. She wasn't deaf. She'd never been. She'd been pretending, or maybe surviving. That night Elias sat alone longer than usual, the fire burning low. Everything he thought he understood had shifted. If she could hear, then she'd heard everything. His silences, his muttered thoughts, his hesitation. She'd heard him call her poor thing once, when he thought she was asleep. She'd heard his loneliness breathing in the walls. And worse, she'd heard her father sell her like livestock and chosen silence as armor. Elias realized then that he hadn't just bought a girl. He'd inherited a wound, and wounds, if ignored, festered. He didn't know how to fix it. He only knew he couldn't pretend anymore. If this story has already pulled you in, if you feel the weight of that moment, the realization the moral line crossed, then you'll want to stay with it. Stories like this don't just entertain. They change how we see people, and there are many more like it waiting. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next, because what Elias does after discovering the truth will define both their lives forever.